Hey, folks, this episode of the Majority Report is brought to you by my favorite sponsor, SunsetLakeCebede.com. Use the coupon code BESTISLEFT. You will get...
Left is best.
What did I say?
Best is left.
Oh, gosh. Left is best. 20% off. Left is best. Gets you... Best is left. Who says that? Maybe we can get them to do both. But it's 20% off. SunsetLakeCebede.com. They've got tinctures. They've got 3 different strengths of tinctures. They've got 3 different flavors of tinctures. They've got tincture with melatonin. Helps you sleep. They've got gummies. They've got gummies with melatonin. Helps you sleep. They've got gummies that just help you relax. They've got smokables. They got keef. They got pre-rolls. They got blunts. They have Cebede coffee, which is my weekend blend. They have Cebede fudge. They've got lotions like this. Unscented, my favorite. This is the only lotion that I have ever put on my body. When my skin dries out, my calves get a little chalky. That's what I do on these.
Chalky calves. Salt.
And also, you know what? It also helps my eczema. Today, my eczema actually was treated right here. You can see this eczema. I put on some of their Solve. The Solve is actually for muscle aches, has arnica in it, and Cebede. But for me, it takes away some of the itchiness of my eczema. The beauty of a Sunset Lake Cebede is that this Cebede is pesticide-free. They use integrated pest management. They practice great farming practices, regenerative farming. All of their Cebede is tested by third parties, so you know exactly what's in it. They'll send you the documents. You can check it out on the website as well. Every single product, every element of that product tested. Tremendous amount of integrity. And SunsetLakeCebede.com. There's a reason why Left is Best gets you 20% off. It's because they're fans of the show and they are real movement partners. They have donated thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to things like strike funds, to things like refugee resettlement, to things like Give Directly, or criminal justice reform, food pantries, the relief in Vermont for when the floods came. SunsetLakeCebede.com. Do yourself a favor right now. Try their products. This should be the only place you ever get Cebede. And it's also great gifts. Check it out. All right, now for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day is Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, August 18th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live to tape steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. No, I wanted you to turn it down, not to turn it off. There we go, Matt.
All right, you guys
but it's
got
all right.
enough.
Friday's here. Look, folks, I said we're doing this live to tape. Here's Emma Vigeland.
Hi.
She's here.
Hi.
We should tell you that I am at the beach with my kids and probably nursing all my eczema.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm at a wedding.
Emma's at a wedding right now.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about the sharks at the beach, that is? Have you seen this? Sharks are getting closer. Anyway, I don't want to scare you. It's
maybe.
freaky. I'm not going in the water.
I saw something on Cape Cod. I saw something on
I'm too North Dakota for that.
near here. Yeah. Near here in New York.
Not going in over the knees.
Just
sorry.
wade.
Right.
Yeah, just wade.
All right.
Like
Well,
when I was, growing
I don't
up,
go swim. I just wait. I get run into the waves.
my mom was like is a big like swimmer in college. We would play a game where we'd go on the Cape as far out as we could and then see like how far the shoreline was. And I would never do that now. I would never do that now because I'm freaking afraid of all these sharks because the water's warming up and then the planet's burning too. So happy Friday.
Happy Friday, everybody. With that said, we do have a show for you today. A new show. Andrew Seidel, attorney with the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, author of American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Important thing to note. In fact, it's, we're increasingly seeing the Supreme Court, and, let's not kid ourselves. There's a couple of fundamentalists on there. And they are tearing down the wall between church and state. And they're also doing so, let's say, there is a pretty tight Venn diagram between these fundamentalists and sort of right-wing politics. But they also sort of help each other. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's the same sort of incentive structure, but at other times it's also like, this is the one thing we can agree on. If you want to inhibit the universality, let's say, of health insurance, one of the good ways of doing it is to say that my religion does not allow me to pay into this system. We start with things like abortion, but I also don't believe in doing this way. Or if you want to destroy public education, the way you do this, or I should say public schools, the way you do it is you redefine public education as being, we collect money for education, then we give it out to private schools, 80% of which, incidentally, are religious schools. Mm-hmm. And, 90% of those which are, are Christian. I mean, just for example, there's a lot of other sort of inroads that they're making against this, and this is a great interview. It's a problem. It's going to get worse.
Yeah. In Arizona, it's happening with that voucher program, right? In Oklahoma, they're basically saying, I'm stripping all the pretense away from it as well. So that's
important interview.
Yeah.
Couple of words from our sponsor before we go. First, let me ask you a question, Emma. Or actually, let me ask it of all of you. ¿Estás disfrutando de mi podcast?
Sí, estoy disfrutando tu podcast.
I don't know anything. I don't know how to speak any language.
We ran.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks to Babbel.
Oh.
I know what that means.
I need Babbel, I guess.
You do. Do you? Well, you can. With Babbel, you can start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Actually, I think we might have an extra account.
Okay.
If you want to really learn Spanish. Look, Babbel is not only one of the most effective ways to learn a second language, maybe it's your third language, I don't know, but it's also super convenient. And what Babbel does is it teaches you basically how to speak in real life conversations. Ultimately, maybe if you want to start like deconstructing, I don't know, a Kierkegaard book that you read, you might need to pick it up. But if you're going to have conversations with people about like asking, how to order food or asking for directions or, speak to, people you buying stuff to or, talk with, somebody who lives on your street or whatever it is. Maybe you're on vacation. Babbel is a great way to do it. You don't have to sit there and, talk through an app essentially. Plus Babbel's speech recognition technology not only does Babbel help you like learn what words to say, but how to say it. Helps you with the accent. I'm still working on it. But this summer, you could start speaking a new language with Babbel. Great on the beach, ladies and gentlemen. Why Babbel? It works. Instead of paying hundreds of bucks for a private tutor, or kidding yourself with these language apps that are more than just like games, Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are designed by over 150 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. All Babbel's tips and tools for learning a new language are approachable. They are completely accessible. They are rooted, like I say, in real life situations, and they're delivered in a conversation-based teaching style. And here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, you can get 55% off your Babbel subscription. That is not a typo or a misstatement on my fact. Let me just double check that. 55%. This is only for our listeners at babbel.com/majority. Get 55% off babbel.com/majority, spelled BABBEL.com/majority. Rules and restrictions may apply. We'll put the link in the YouTube and podcast description. Folks, you got 10 minutes on the subway, 10 minutes on your walk to work or whatever it is, or you commute. Learn to speak a language. Also, there's nothing better and nothing that lasts more than growing a tree. This summer, I've got a story about this. This summer, you can spend all your money on going on a trip or a hotel or this and that, or something fleeting or something that you're going to buy that's going to break. Or you can spend a lot less money and make a beautiful garden that will give you years of pleasure with fastgrowingtrees.com. This is one of those products that I used well before they became a sponsor on the program. Fast Growing Trees sells thousands of really easy to grow like plants and shrubs and tree varieties, fruit trees, shade trees, evergreen trees. Doesn't matter what climate you live in, what zone. They've got Meyer lemons. Like I say, they got evergreen trees. They've got all sorts of, they've got Korean pear trees, which after year one,
They start growing pears?
year one,
Wow.
I got pear trees. Put it in the ground last fall. Got Korean pears. And the beauty of fast growing trees is you don't wait in lines. You don't go to these big box stores that have a very limited amount of variety. They ship them to you and they're there within a couple of days. They have a great system of protecting the trees. And if you don't have a green thumb, it's not an issue whatsoever. Fast growing trees have experts that can Zoom or chat or call you. And they are always available, eager to help. They can even walk you through the entire garden to solve the problems you're having with your plants and trees. They have specialized degrees. They have training. Fast Growing Trees also has a 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee. You know, everything's going to look great, fresh out of the box. Again, my blue meringue trees, that's the lilacs that come back twice. Pear trees, I got grass shrubs, I got everything. Join almost 2 million happy Fast Growing Trees customers. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/majority now. Get 15% off your entire order. That's 15% off fastgrowingtrees.com/majority. We will put that link in the podcast and YouTube subscription. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andrew Seidel, attorney with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, author of American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Emma will be back on Monday. I will be back
The following Monday.
the following Monday.
Yes.
All right. Enjoy this interview. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Andrew Seidel. He is an attorney with Americans for Separation of Church and State and author of his most recent American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So we talk a lot about the Supreme Court here, and frankly, we also talk about not always together, but sort of a creeping fundamentalism that has infused our politics. I've been told by a biographer of Mike Pence that he was really probably arguably the most powerful theocrat that we have ever elected in the history of this country. Fortunately, he didn't have the opportunity to push that as much as he might, although we did see it in the form of 3 Supreme Court justices who were appointed during Donald Trump's time. You've written a book that basically talks about how religious freedom is weaponized. Well, just broaden that out a little bit for us before we get into the details of the sort of limiting principles that you think should be applied and the constitutional basis for those limiting principles, as well as things like RFRA and sort of the changes we've seen recently on the court.
Sure. So, religious freedom has long been a shield, right? It is this hallowed protection against government overreach, right? The minority's protection against the tyranny of the majority. And it's a right that's guaranteed by a strong separation of church and state, but not anymore. And we have seen over the last decade a well-funded, powerful network of Christian nationalist organizations and judges. We're talking like $1 billion shadow network here that has been working to turn that protection of religious freedom enjoyed by all of us into a weapon of supremacy and privilege for the few. And it really is a war of conquest. We're not of land, but the Crusaders, which is how I refer to the groups in the book, are looking to conquer our Constitution and remake it in their image. America was not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. We're not a Christian nation, but they are setting out to make us so. And the weapon that they're forging to help bring that about is this new version of religious freedom.
Okay.
But just when you say conquerors, or when you say, you're taking it from the Crusaders, that's, I think, really helpful language for people to understand religious fundamentalism as it shows itself in this country, or in general, but the way that they exert power, which is not striking compromise with them, because they do not view compromise as something that they can entertain, because they are fundamentalists, which means that their principles and their goals are fundamental. And so it's about beating them, right? As opposed to striking some kind of middle ground. I don't know if that would be your assessment of their dogmatism.
I think that's right. We're talking about minority rule. And this is one of the reasons they are seeking this weapon, is because of the changing and shifting demographics in the country. They're looking out and seeing their power and their privilege and the deference that they believe they are due waning and disappearing. And they're desperately seeking a way to recover that. And religious freedom really is becoming a weapon for that. And when I say weaponizing religious freedom, that's not a frightful turn of phrase. I mean precisely that. In case after case, they are litigating the legal meaning of religious freedom as a constitutional right, and in the process, redefining it, perverting the meaning, right? For them, the Crusaders' religious freedom challenges they're superficially about things like Christian crosses or veterans or playgrounds and skin knees or even private school vouchers or bakeries and website designers or coaches that want to pray. But really what they are about is privilege and supremacy, literally about privileging the right kind of conservative Christian over everybody else. The goal is to use religious freedom to elevate conservative Christianity above the law.
And so, what was, like you say, a shield protecting religious expression from an overreaching government has now become more of a sword that is sort of like piercing through the ability of government to have some primacy, I guess, in the context of civil society, in terms of its ability to sort of to regulate society and make laws and follow the Constitution in many respects. Let's talk about you talk about sort of 3 lines which create sort of like principles upon which we can assess the way that the court cases that you discuss sort of are crossing these lines in many respects. But first, I mean, talk about like when did this, it feels like there's always been this sort of like tension, right? That has existed. But when did this iteration, sort of this change in legal strategy, it seems to me, in sort of wielding religious freedom as a weapon, as an opportunity to sort of exempt itself? Because, a long time we had in this country, like blue laws. I grew up in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. You couldn't buy booze on a Sunday. And it was because it was, I guess, an unchristian thing to do. So like just talk a little bit about how it has changed maybe over the course of the past, 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of in the right spot when you date it to them, because the Crusaders they've laid the groundwork for this for decades, really beginning after Brown versus Board of Education. And you see the rise of the religious right and the moral majority and school choice, and then actually choosing abortion as their wedge issue to avoid sounding like the racists that they were. And then the Supreme Court really gets involved and signals the start of the crusade, or its willingness to participate in this 2010 opinion involving a Christian cross that's erected in the Mojave Desert. And the Crusaders, these legal groups, again, that make up this billion-dollar shadow network, they're groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which brought the 303 creative case, the website designer case that allowed the business to discriminate against the LGBTQ folks that the Supreme Court just decided. The American Center for Law and Justice, the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, Liberty Council, First Liberty Institute, right? This kind of Orwellian word salad, right? They heard the message that the Supreme Court preached in 2010 in that opinion, and then the floodgates opened. And really after that, you see those groups filing lawsuit after lawsuit. They stoke that fear of status loss, right? And then they raise millions, perhaps billions of dollars, and you see them setting these cases up, and then the conservative justices on the court come along and knock them down. And then that really accelerates once Trump took over. And, the more we start to find out about this, the more it begins to look really like collusion, especially when you find out that some of these same groups and donors are wining and dining the justices on their super yachts and private jets and the island hopping vacations, none of which were disclosed. And really, I think the word we're looking for there is corruption.
All right. Well, let's talk about these lines that you outline. Belief versus action, in terms of a line that can be, I guess, transgressed, to use religious terms. Actions that are once those are established as actions that are subject to regulation under the rubric of like, where are the rights of others, and essentially state and church, where are those lines drawn? State power versus a personal religion. Let's start with one. This belief versus or action, that line. Explain that to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for folks to try to understand the framework that we use to answer these questions. Because when I was writing this book, and I hate the way lawyers write and sound, and I actively try to avoid that when I write. But I think when religion and the law collide, the questions that are presented are often not that hard. And the religious freedom cases that the Supreme Court has been deciding, I actually think are pretty easy to solve if you can apply these kind of three basic lines, unless, of course, there's some ulterior motive behind the opinions. And the first one that I distinguish is the difference. There's a difference between a right to believe and a right to act on that belief. And the right to believe is absolute. And in fact, it's probably the one absolute right we possess under our Constitution. But your right to act on that belief is not. And I opened the book with several stories, real things that happened about drivers letting Jesus take the wheel. Now, they are free to believe that Jesus is a backseat driver, but the civil law can step in and say, hey, no, you can't do that. You actually have to maintain control of your vehicle at all times. You can't just let go and let Jesus take the wheel. And we kind of all agree with this. There's none of the Crusaders or the religious freedom groups that are out there are advocating that people should be able to drive recklessly down the highway at 100 miles per hour, as one of these folks did. It's perfectly acceptable for the government to fine those drivers, to take away their license, maybe even in some extreme cases send them to prison. And that's because belief is unlimited, but action is not.
And what if there was, and so the idea is that the action is, the government is, according to the way that we're starting to see interpretations now, that the government imposing this law, even though it's a law on everybody, right? That you got to keep both hands on the wheel. I don't know, maybe one hand on the wheel. I'm not exactly sure. It's been
Control of your vehicle.
Control of your vehicle. And that the law is not that you can't let Jesus be your co-pilot. The law simply is that you, the driver, must maintain control of your car. That is now being interpreted by the court in some instances. It seems like, and certainly this is the case of the plaintiffs in a lot of these cases, is that is an active inhibition of the driver to practice their religion, which says that Jesus is my co-pilot, and so I need him to co-pilot my car. That's basically the problem that we have.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things is the Supreme Court just has ignored that line altogether, and it often conflates belief with action, or it says that action is forced just if something contradicts your belief, which is fundamentally not true. The real question, and this is the second line that you draw, is okay, if it's okay for the government to step in some instances, in cases of people acting on those beliefs, well, when is it okay for the government to step in? And in that question, the answer is also pretty simple, and it's where the rights of other people begin. And it may be permissible for them to step in at other times, but we know for sure that where the rights of other people begin, it's okay for the government to step in and say, no, that act is impermissible. So everybody has heard that your right to swing your fist ends at the other person's nose. Your right to exercise your religion ends where the rights of other people begin. Religion is not a license to harm others or infringe their rights in any way. And that has been the way we've always interpreted it, except in the last 10 years. And you can see this in case after case, the Supreme Court just turning its back on this principle, taking it out in the backyard and burying it.
Well, are they burying it, or are they basically kind of gaslighting the people who might be harmed and saying, well, this is not harm? I mean, like I'm sure we'll get into some of the cases for in a bit, but for me, what comes to mind is, what was the state that is now allowing for charter schools, Oklahoma, to go to religious schools, right? Like in a vacuum, that doesn't harm anyone directly, but it harms Oklahoma's public school infrastructure and like the funding mechanism there. So part of that is like a bad faith reading of what constitutes harm, I think, by the court.
I think that's right. And fun tidbit, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, my organization, just sued Oklahoma over that exact issue last week. And it's even worse than what you said. It's actually a Catholic public school. It's not just money going to a private religious school. It's a religious public school, which the American mind just cannot comprehend. It's so alien to us. But to your point, I think this brings to my mind the reason that we are seeing this crusade in the first place, the reason that Christian nationalists are seeking this weapon. And it's because it is largely a backlash against equality realized, right? Conservative white Christian American status as the dominant group in our society is threatened, and it has been for some time. They're losing the culture wars, which is a silly phrase, I think, that is often meant to mask attacks on human rights. Their benighted ideas and ideology are unpopular. They're losing that privilege and deference which they believe they are due. And we know that when that happens in a society, when the dominant group or caste feels threatened or left behind, that it reacts or it overreacts in ways to retain that status. That's why we see them turn to Christian nationalism, to violent insurrection on January 6th, to tearing down democratic norms, and to these so-called strongmen. And that is why we are seeing them seeking out this weapon. It's because of equality.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, we'll get to line 3, and then we'll sort of like apply these against some of these decisions over the past 10 or plus years. Number 2 was basically just determining what actions are at least easily considered to be regulated by government. the third line is just simply government power versus personal religion. Is that just break down to state and church separation?
I think that's colloquially the way that we say that. If I could get that word out, colloquially, the way that we would say it, the separation between church and state, right? Our government has no religion to exercise. And government officials, when they're acting in that official capacity, when they're wielding their government power and the resources that are attached to those offices, they can't use that power or those resources to promote their personal religion. And historically, that's not the way that we've spoken about the separation of church and state. I think there's a good argument that that's how the framers of our Constitution understood it. But I think us reframing it in that way so that people realize it's not just about a nativity scene on the lawn of City Hall, that it's really, we're talking about abuses of power here. It has been a really helpful way to reframe that so that people understand what we're really talking about when we mean the separation of church and state.
Let's just start with I guess, I don't know if it makes more sense to start with Davis and Ermold versus Ermold or Masterpiece Cake Shop Colorado to bring these out. But I guess the drawing lines in Kentucky, it would be the first one. Is this where you see the first sort of like incremental, the sort of the mission creep, I guess, or maybe the whatever the reverse of mission creep is? We start to see religion being wielded as a weapon as opposed to a shield.
I think this is definitely one of the instructive cases. And it's instructive because it kind of brings all three of those lines that we just talked about into one case. And for people that don't remember, this is the Kim Davis, the county clerk in Kentucky. She was the county clerk and she refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, even though that is a constitutional right that they have. And Kim Davis,
the irony, of course, is the Supreme Court essentially read it into the Constitution. Got to the point where yes. It was clear that the Constitution protected the right under I believe it was the 14th Amendment, right? That basically said the right to marry is available to people of all sexual orientations, and she was one of the only real holdouts, like official holdouts in the country, if I remember correctly. Go ahead. So walk us through this and how this began to sort of, I guess, if this was the beginning or it was just a case that really sort of like exemplifies these lines.
I think it's a case that exemplifies them. And just to hang one note on your point about marriage equality, one of the reasons that the Dobbs opinion, which overturned Roe versus Wade, is so scary, is that it goes after the reasoning that supports marriage equality in the Obergefell decision. It really does put a lot of our other rights at risk, including that one. So Kim Davis is the county clerk, and she denies same-sex couples their marriage licenses, then eventually denies everybody marriage licenses because of her religious beliefs. And I mean, we can see here, she's absolutely, of course, free to believe whatever she wanted about marriage, that it's only for people of opposite sex or only for people of the same race, which was what a lot of people believed for a long time in this country. But that religious belief is not a license for her to act on it. And we see her crossing the second and third lines here. First, she was denying the rights of other people based on her personal religious beliefs. So that's line 2, right? That can't be permitted, even in the name of God. She's free to believe such things about marriage and practice such beliefs in her own marriage, but she is not allowed to impose those beliefs about marriage onto other people and impact their rights. And then we also see the separation of church and state implicated here because she was using the machinery of the state to impose her religious beliefs on other people. Right? She is using the power of a public office to extend the reach of her religious beliefs. And I mean, there was one point that was really striking. It was near the end of all of the litigation. And one of the couples actually asked her, they said, under whose authority are you not issuing these licenses? And she said, under God's authority, which is fundamentally wrong because the only authority that she has to issue marriage licenses is from the state of Kentucky. So it's a useful one because it shows kind of when you establish these clear lines, the outcomes that should occur in these cases, and that they're actually like not that hard to solve sometimes.
I mean, from the perspective of the Christian right, would they argue, at least rhetorically, and I don't think it happened in the context of this case, but I feel like we're not far from this, and certainly like around that time, folks like Ann Coulter would make this argument that there is a civic religion that is that, and by adopting the idea that gay people can marry, there's an imposition of this sort of religion of government or whatever I can't remember exactly the rhetorical turn of phrase they would use, but would there be an argument? Were there a religion that espoused marriage equality, as we know it as marriage equality, that somehow you're embracing this religion as opposed to Christianity?
Yeah, they've certainly tried that, and it's taken various forms, right? It was secular humanism for a long time, and now I think it's wokeism is the big bugaboo for them. And one of the examples that I use to explain this to folks is actually ended up being a case that the Supreme Court decided a couple terms ago as well. Think of a coach at a public school, right? So think of any sport.
This is the Kennedy case
this
coming out of the Northwest.
Yes. Right.
Exactly, yeah. So imagine what it would look like if the government was imposing Christianity on kids. It's not hard to imagine. It happens all over the country, right? The coach gathers the kids together in a huddle and says, okay, we're going to pray to Jesus before this game. I want you all to go out there and win one for JC, okay? Very clearly a government official imposing religion on other people's kids, okay? Not allowed. What does it look like if we're imposing secular humanism or atheism or something like that in the same instance? It would be, okay, kids, there is no God. Don't worry about that. I want you to go out there and stick to the playbook. No God on three. 1, 2, 3, no God. Okay. I've not seen that happen. I've been doing state church stuff for like more than a decade now. I've never seen anything close to that. But maybe it could happen. A country that has a strong separation of church and state, you would see something like the coach huddling the kids up and saying, okay, I want you to practice or play just as hard as you practice. Get out there and give it your all. Leave it all on the field, right? Religion doesn't enter into it in any way. And this is actually, by the way, how we protect the religious freedom of every single citizen, right? Because we leave it up to the families and to the parents and to the houses of worship to decide. We don't say it's up to the machinery of the state to impose these religions on other people or their children, right? That is the way that we protect everybody's religious freedom, is by having that robust separation between church and state. Now, if you really want to use the state to impose your religion on others, then yeah, you have to attack that and you have to figure out a way around it. And that is absolutely, Sam. I mean, that is one of the most popular, and it's probably, I bet if you looked back at the history of attacks on the principle of church-state separation, that's probably the argument that has the longest life. I think you can trace that back to the founding for sure.
Let's go to what you, I guess, you call one of the opening hostilities. This is a case of the Church of the Lukumi Babalu. I'm not pronouncing it correctly.
Lukumi Babalu I.
That was close, Sam. Good work.
I'm sort of shocked by that. Versus Hialeah.
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 Yeah.
This is based upon an ordinance that was in Florida, in Hialeah, Florida. Walk us through this case and put it in context as like the sort of changing things. And we should also say this is the same year that RFRA is passed. And let us know if there's any relevance in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, this case is actually really fascinating because it's one of the few times where you have a really clear, obvious example of government hostility towards a minority religion, working its way all the way to the Supreme Court in the modern era, and then the Supreme Court deciding on that case. And it starts in Hialeah in Florida, and there's this I started by talking about this angry city council meeting, and the city council president begins by asking this kind of essentially this angry mob, what can we do to prevent this church from opening? And you have the mayor and the city council and the police departments and citizens and the chaplain of the police department, everybody there testifying, trying to shut this church down, to prevent it from opening, from practicing another religion, from exercising their religious freedom. And it's because the church that was going to open was, it was not a popular church in town. I'm trying to remember the quote. I think they said that it was going to regress the community into paganism, and the city would not please God. And that's because it's a church that practiced Santeria. And part of the Santeria religion included animal sacrifice. And Santeria has this really sort of fascinating history as its own religion. It's got these really interesting ties to Catholicism, but you have this city council and all the government officials actively trying to pass rules and regulations and ordinances to prevent this church from opening and from practicing their religion. And they're successful at that. And they pass all of these attempts to ban animal sacrifice that have this, it's hard to even say they have a veneer of fairness about them, because they very clearly target this one church and this one particular religious practice. And the case works its way all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court does the right thing and says, no, of course you cannot target one particular religion. That's impermissible. You can't prevent this church from opening just because you don't like what their religion is going to be. And there's all this really, if anybody's a Carl Hyacin reader, there's the backstory on this church, and the way the community tried to shut it down is really amazing. But yes, eventually you get this good opinion from the Supreme Court, and this is what hostility towards religion really does look like. And it's when you compare that to the modern cases that we are seeing, and that the Supreme Court is deciding that the government has been hostile to religion. I mean, it's laughable when you kind of compare those.
But it's religion. I just got, it's not the traditional evangelical Christianity, right? So that's I think the difference. That's where you have the disparate treatment by the Supreme Court, perhaps, is the fact that they're more willing to rule against religions that are not in the mainstream of like American Christianity. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is absolutely true. I mean, this case is from the early 1990s, so it's not quite the same, but you do get a really good example of what you're talking about, Emma, with the Muslim ban case, right? I mean, that is probably the closest analogy that you can get to this Santeria case in the last 10 years is Donald Trump's Muslim ban, right? I mean, clearly targeting one particular religion, using some of the same rhetoric that we saw in that Santeria case, actively targeting it, but you get this Supreme Court not deciding in favor of the minority religion there. The Supreme Court does not strike down that Muslim ban, even though it was very clearly hostile to Islam, to the religion of Muslims. And it's even more striking when you pair that with the case that you mentioned a minute ago, Sam, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, because a lot of people forget that the reason the court decided that case in favor of the bakery was because the court said that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission was hostile to the bakery's religion. Yeah.
All right. So the best analogy I can find, at least in terms of like that Florida case, and the argument, although I don't think it exists in, let's say, the Masterpiece Cake case, is sort of like trap laws, for abortion clinics, which are set up specifically like, we're not really outlawing abortion, but we're just putting in all of these laws that make it practically impossible. I mean, literally practically, from a practical standpoint, impossible to provide an abortion. That's what was going on in Florida in that case. They were clearly trying to outlaw the presence of that religion, where they could maybe say like, okay, we don't allow animal slaughter on, within the city grounds if it is not for consumption. I mean, I don't know. Like broadly like that would be okay, right? But to say no, unless it was established that somehow that ordinance was a function of trying to keep out that religion in that instance. And
it's an excellent analogy. And I got to admit, Sam, I'm kind of bummed I didn't put it in the book. Next time.
Next edition. But that's what it does feel like to me. And that's the argument that they were making in Masterpiece, was that this commission is trying to sort of like target, like to single out religious people. And in fact, no, it's not. It's just saying like, you're in the cake making business. You got to make cakes for people.
It's even worse than that, because I looked at whether or not that argument was actually made by Alliance Defending Freedom and the bakery in that case. And it was something like in the 380, however many pages were filed, it was like 11 paragraphs where they even mentioned that argument. They weren't making that argument. The Supreme Court itself picked up that argument and ran with it to decide the case. And Emma, this gets to your point too, because we actually have studies that have crunched some of these numbers. And the studies don't cover the biggest wins from the two most recent terms. So the numbers are actually, that I'm about to say, the reality is more dramatic now. But before the courts were packed by Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society and Trump, courts ruled in favor of religion about half the time, which is, I mean, that's what you'd expect, like you flip a coin, half the time you win. But under Chief Justice John Roberts, one study found that the win rate jumps to 81%. And it's crucial because this is not a pro-religion shift, but a pro-Christian shift. So in early courts, Christianity was favored about 44% of the time in cases, but under Roberts, that number doubles up to 85% of the time, right? So you can quantify that religious freedom has become a weapon of Christian privilege. And what I try to do in American Crusade is put a face on those numbers and then prove that the new guiding principle of this packed Supreme Court is not the Constitution or the law, but simply this: conservative Christianity wins. That's it.
And you made the point that the court sort of got out in front of the plaintiffs in Masterpiece Cake. They also did that in some respects with the Kennedy case as well. That's the one with the coach up in the like. The facts were completely, they sort of made up the facts. I mean, I don't know how really else to express that. But they claim that their timeline was wrong, and the implications of like whether the coach was fired was wrong. I think if I remember correctly, there was a lot of like, it really, I mean, there was a time where conservatives would talk about an activist court. The concept itself, I never really bought into. But when you're making the plaintiff's case in a way that even the plaintiff is not contemplating, that feels like if there was something called activism, that would be activism.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that in this case that you're talking about is a prime example. And I'm so glad you're highlighting the dishonesty here, because it's even worse than people realize. So in that case, it came out of Washington. So it came out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit, one of the judges, warned that the Christian nationalist group in that case, First Liberty Institute, was spinning a, quote, false and a, quote, deceitful narrative in that case. I mean, if a judge wrote that about me and something that I had submitted to the court, like I would take a sabbatical. I would take some ethics classes. I would certainly not turn around and appeal my case to the Supreme Court. And it's even worse. The 3-judge panel in that case said that the facts in the record utterly belie the coach's contention that the prayer was personal and private. And there was this really amazing kind of series of in one of the opinions where the judge compares what the Christian nationalist group says to reality. And shows, and the judge calls them the unmoored claims of this group side by side. I've never seen anything like that. And they appeal to the Supreme Court expecting that their deceitful narrative will fall on friendly ears and be adopted. And they were right, to the point where you have Justice Sonia Sotomayor in her dissent throwing up her hand. I mean, she's putting photographic evidence that debunks these lies into her dissent. showing that this is not a personal, silent, private prayer, but that this is a coach imposing his prayer on other children in the middle of the field. I mean, this is a court of alternative facts now. That's where we are.
Let's talk about RFRA, and this is a law that was passed in 1993, and folks can sort of there's about maybe a dozen and a half cases that you go through that sort of like track this timeline, and you've done an addendum to pick up on a couple of new cases that have come out, obviously Dobbs and more. But let's just talk about RFRA for a little bit, because this is increasingly, this feels like it's being the statute is being used in a way that wasn't necessarily contemplated, or maybe it was. Just walk us through that.
Yeah, so I mean, RFRA is this really interesting law that was passed in response to another Supreme Court decision, Employment Division versus Smith, and it really starts to it's certainly a watershed moment in this fight to weaponize religious liberty. And I do think it's an interesting question. Did the other side know when they were pushing for RFRA that they were going to turn around and try to weaponize it the way they ended up doing, or was this just something that kind of they realized was an option later on? It's really hard to know. But really what RFRA does is, first of all, it cuts across every single law, past, present, and future. So it's been dubbed by some to be a super statute, otherwise known as a constitutional amendment. RFRA requires the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution in a certain way, which is also a little bit problematic. And then it actually privileges believers compared to everybody else, which presents a problem under the third line that we identified earlier. But what it really seeks to do is restore this, what essentially was dubbed this kind of law standard of religious freedom. And I go over what that standard
and just
was.
The use of restore, also the implication is that this is the way it's always been, as opposed to this is a sort of a new innovation in weaponizing religion.
Exactly, and it's a telling use of the term. And when you were talking about blue laws earlier, I do get into the discussion of those in this discussion of how we ended up with RFRA. And I mean, it really is a fascinating case study, and it became clear that RFRA was being used by these conservative groups, these crusaders before the crusade, to try to weaponize religious freedom, because it is this sort of super statute, this constitutional amendment. And you start to see Republican-controlled states pass their own versions of RFRAs, including like Texas and Arkansas and Mississippi and Indiana under Mike Pence. And by 2010, 2012, 2013, you see liberals and progressives and equality activists really turning around and fighting an all-out battle against RFRA and these state RFRAs, where back in the 90s, when it was initially passed, you had all these strange bedfellows getting together and saying, yes, we need to pass this law. But right now it has become the divide just that I'm talking about in American Crusade overall.
Andrew Seidel, attorney with the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, author. The book is American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I think this is a story that is, I mean, in many respects, we're maybe at the end of the beginning of this sort of long-term assault on our civil statutes. And we're going to see it. We're already seeing it in the context of like funding religious schools and defunding public education. This was Betsy DeVos's sort of like greatest dream, she and her husband, of maintaining public education, but not public schools, so that we will just be funding religious schools. But I think we're going to see this across the board in many areas. This is a really important book for people to have a sense of, like, where these lines are being crossed. Really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Andrew.
It might take all the strength I got
to get to where I want. But I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light's shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted